Eala joins fellow Filipina players in practice at Rizal Memorial ahead of Philippine Women's Open. Eala joined fellow Filipina players Eala and Eala on the center court of the newly refurbished Rizal Memorial Tennis Center ahead of the Philippine Women's Open, which will commence on Monday. Eala and Eala were Eala's teammates in the recent Southeast Asian Games. Eala is part of the tournament's qualifiers and will play fellow Filipino Angelica Alcala on Saturday, while Lorraine Jalarina will face Pingtan Plipuek of Thailand. Eala and Eala, meanwhile, are part of the main draw. The Tropical A hovered between warmth and expectation at the Rizal Memorial Tennis Center in Manila. Early in the day, sunlight filtered through towering acacia trees lining the courts, casting long shadows that danced softly on the freshly refurbished hard courts. The usually quiet complex, once steeped in the history of old Philippine sports, now reinvigorated for a bold new chapter, buzzed with energy as coaches, ball kids, officials, and fans began to gather. This was not just another practice session. This was a prelude to history in motion. Today, the star attraction wasn't just the promise of competition. It was the sight of Eala, the Filipina tennis sensation who has carried the hopes of a nation onto courts across the globe, stepping onto home soil once again, not just as a spectator, but as a leading champion preparing to compete on her home turf. Tennis racket and ball more than a practice, a gathering of heart and hope. Eala's presence at the center court wasn't solitary. Beside her were fellow Filipina players, Eala and Eala, young athletes who have walked similar paths of competition, camaraderie, and national pride. All three shared recent moments of triumph and challenge, including representing the Philippines at the Southeast Asian Games, where camaraderie was forged in fire and bronze medals were turned into motivation. Together, they prepared for the Philippine Women's Open, a tournament unlike any the country has seen before. This was not simply an international tennis event. This was the first ever WTA 125 tournament held in the Philippines, a milestone that elevated the nation onto the global women's tennis stage. For Filipino tennis, this signaled transition from aspiration to recognition. The significance of this moment resonated deeply with each practice swing, each forehand in motion, and every rally echoing across the net. To the untrained eye, it was a practice. To the heart of a nation hungry for sporting breakthroughs, it was a chance to witness the next chapter of a legacy. Filipino Eala, a story bigger than tennis. Alex's arrival in Manila was met by waves of fans and officials alike, underscoring just how much this moment meant. After competing on the international stage, most recently at the Australian Open, where matches drew passionate crowds and international attention, Eala flew home with the familiar mix of triumph and determination that has defined her young career. Her journey is one of evolving expectations. At just 20 years old, Alex has already shattered barriers and rewritten history. She became the first Filipina to break into the WTA Top 50 ranking, reaching as high as number 44 in the world. Such achievements have not only raised the profile of Philippine tennis, but have inspired a new generation of players who now see themselves reflected in her success. Her presence at Rizal Memorial was different this time. It was homecoming in its fullest sense. She was no longer just representing the country abroad. She was about to compete on Philippine soil, under Philippine skies, with her flag waving in support. Microphone the court as a stage for dreams. What made this practice session unique was the palpable sense of intentionality behind every stroke. Alex and her Filipina teammates weren't just warming up. They were planting seeds of belief, for themselves, for young fans watching, and for a nation that has waited decades for a homegrown tennis spectacle of this scale. Between practices, laughter rang out. Coaches offered guidance. Ball kids raced to retrieve wayward balls, their youthful enthusiasm reminding onlookers that this moment was as much about inspiration as it was about competition. This was a stage where dreams were both celebrated and tested. One by one, the players took to the center court, serving, rallying, and testing conditions. Local fans paused to watch, snapping photos, waving flags, and cheering quietly from the sidelines. There was a sense of collective pride, not merely because Eala is the most famous among them, but because each of these athletes was part of a movement, the rise of Filipina tennis. What made the scene particularly moving was the way Alex interacted with her teammates. There was no aloofness, no aura of untouchability. Instead, there was camaraderie, shared focus, and mutual respect, a reminder that tennis, often perceived as an individual sport, can be deeply communal in its aspirations. Leaf fluttering in the wind. Rizal Memorial, a stadium reimagined. The setting itself was part of the narrative. The Rizal Memorial Tennis Center, newly refurbished, symbolizes renewal. Courts gleamed under the sun, nets were tightened, lines freshly painted. The very ground beneath the players' feet seemed eager to bear witness to history. For decades, Rizal Memorial has hosted countless matches across various sports, its name synonymous with Philippine athletics. Now, as it welcomed world-class tennis competition, it felt as though the spirit of every past Filipino champion lingered in the heat of the day. Young fans wandered the grounds with posters and handmade banners. Coaches from local clubs huddled together, examining the form of elite players. There were whispers of excitement. What if this is the moment tennis truly takes off in the Philippines? Perhaps it already had. Globe showing Europe, Africa the bigger picture, more than one tournament. While this practice was a singular event, it represented something much larger. The Philippine Women's Open, running from January 26 to 31st, was the culmination of years of effort by organizers, officials, and athletes alike. It marked the Philippines' permanent entry into the WTA circuit as a host nation. In coming years, it could lead to even bigger tournaments landing in Manila, each building on the legacy begun here. For Alex herself, this tournament was both a homecoming and a proving ground. Having just competed in the Australian Open and represented her country in the SEA Games, her return to Manila was a chance to ground herself where it all began, as both a champion and a daughter of her nation. She wasn't just practicing for points or prize money. She was practicing for meaning, for significance, for legacy.